Having sold a treble-winning keeper who divided fan opinion, it's incredibly fitting that Ederson's replacement is another treble-winning keeper, who before even kicking a ball for City, has similarly split the fanbase. Gianluigi Donnarumma arrives in Manchester with a seismic reputation as one of the world's elite goalkeepers, if not the best outright, and a shot-stopping specialist who propelled Italy to Euros success and PSG to Champions League glory. Yet the reaction among not just City fans, but football fans generally, has been polarised. For some, his signing is a statement of intent, a huge name and world-class footballer, a proven winner who will help restore City to their dominant best. For others, it's an unreasonable gamble. They have concerns regarding the fit, practicalities of incorporating him into a Guardiola system, and question whether his phenomenal shot-stopping reputation is warranted. I've watched countless hours of Donnarumma's matches, analysed the most relevant data, and have theorised how he could realistically be integrated into City's system. My verdict? It all depends on which Donnarumma you're talking about. There's been a lot of negativity and hyperbole around this signing, so let's bring some balance and start with Donnarumma's key selling point, his shot stopping. Time and time again, he's shown he can be truly elite in this area. On his day, on his line, there's nobody better. What impresses me most is the consistency with which he defends his top corners. At 6'5", with a wingspan that rivals a juvenile albatross, he dominates those areas of the goal. That natural reach, complemented by his sometimes alien reflexes, allows him to claw away shots that seem destined for the top corner, often with just the strength of his fingertips. These interventions have produced some of his most dramatic and memorable moments, none more so than in the latter stages of last season's Champions League. For most keepers, those saves are out of reach, both figuratively and literally. For Donnarumma, the combination of his frame and reactions can be a cheat code. This is reflected in shot-stopping data from the 23-24 season, where he ranked in the top 7% for a wordy metric known as post-shot expected goals, less goals allowed. This stat essentially tries to quantify shot stopping by measuring the place and power of the shot, in addition to what expected goals already accounts for, such as context of the shot, and then gives us a positive or negative number based on the number of goals conceded. Whilst not perfect by any means, it can be a really helpful indicator of a keeper's saving ability. That reach also instructs his positioning and starting stance. Because he's so gangly, he can set himself slightly lower to the ground without worrying about leaving the top corners exposed. He knows he can still cover those areas quickly, so that lower base lets him react explosively to shots while still protecting the upper sections of his goal. In a similar vein, he's able to make the goal as small as possible for the attacker, sticking to his line longer than most keepers, reducing shooting angles and goal-scoring opportunities. Donnarumma also has a reputation as a penalty specialist. In fact, he's won 6 of the 7 shootouts he's been involved in, one of the best records in the modern era. Even outside of shootouts, his penalty save rate is above average. That's a stark contrast to Ederson, who faced 40 penalties during his time at City and saved only 4, 3 of which came in his debut season. Of course, no goalkeeper is signed for their penalty record, and it's even less relevant for a side like City, who've conceded just 3.5 league penalties a season on average over the past 8 years. But given that those penalties almost always result in goals, it's reassuring to know that when the moment comes, City now have a keeper far better equipped to deal with it. Even more so in the context of a penalty shootout. It's not a key selling point as to why you'd be happy with this signing, but it is a nice bonus. What's far more than just a bonus though, is Donnarumma's unique mix of age and experience. He's only 26, relatively young for a goalkeeper, yet he's been playing top-flight football since he was just 16, and now he's entering what should be his physical prime. There's every chance he could improve even further. It's incredibly rare to find a player with this combination, 10 years of elite experience already behind him, and realistically another decade still ahead at the very highest level. And with that experience comes leadership, maturity, and mentality. Donnarumma isn't simply a presence between the post, he's evidently a leader at the back, an organiser, a captain, and a proven winner. Beyond the tangible saves, what stands out is his mental strength. an essential trait for any footballer, but absolutely vital for a goalkeeper where every mistake is scrutinised. That mentality doesn't exist in a vacuum either. It impacts the entire defence. Confidence is contagious. If defenders don't trust their keeper, even subconsciously, they know that if they fail to stop the attack, it's a certain goal. That pressure leads to overthinking, hesitation, and mistakes. But when defenders believe their keeper will make the save, they're no longer in their own heads. They can play more composed, and ironically, make fewer errors, because confidence and competence breeds confidence and competence. Given City's defensive woes of late, this should be a huge boost to their overall solidity. When we pull all of these fantastic traits together, it becomes clear why many argue that Donnarumma is not just the best shot stopper, but the best traditional goalkeeper in the world. Whether that claim is warranted, we'll revisit that later, but notice how I was quite coy with my wording there, specifying traditional. I now need to address the humongous elephant in the room, and want to turn to one of the most misunderstood and ill-informed aspects of his game: his distribution, his ball playing, and his general ability with the ball at his feet. It's impossible to discuss this properly without first outlining what City are losing with the departure of Ederson: shot prevention. This is a completely different discipline from shot stopping. While shot stopping is reactive, saving a ball that's already been struck, shot prevention is proactive, taking steps to stop the shot from happening in the first place. By definition, it's a more effective way of reducing goal threat. Classic examples include coming off the line to sweep up danger or intercept through balls. It wouldn't be fair to say that Donnarumma is glued to his line, but it's true to say that he's far less inclined to leave his line than most to complete interceptions, completing less than one sweep per 90 last season in Ligue 1. And compared to Ederson or Alisson, it's night and day. This will need to change owing to City's high line and the role of the keeper in safeguarding it. I'm not overly concerned by this because Liga is a very different league to the Premier League. Keepers tend to be less aggressive in respect of defensive actions, so I'm hopeful that's just a playstyle and league quirk that can be ironed out. But what I am concerned about is the most overlooked element of shot prevention: on-ball ability. That might sound counterintuitive, surely shot prevention only pertains to off-ball actions. But here's an example to illustrate the point. At Anfield in the 23-24 season, Ortega's performance was widely praised, and on the surface, it's easy to see why. His saves were impressive and kept City in the game. But if we rewind, there's more to these saves than meets the eye. These shots originated from his own distribution. Ortega kept giving the ball away, and suddenly he's forced into a save. This is why on-ball ability is the most underrated aspect of shot prevention. It's far easier to notice something happening than to notice it not happening. With the arrival of Donnarumma, that weapon City once possessed is no more, because, based on his career so far, Donnarumma is objectively poor with his feet. His distribution isn't up to the level of a modern goalkeeper. He's too easy to influence under pressure, and he offers next to nothing of value in build-up play. And this is where I need to challenge a lot of the misinformation that's out there, because pretending otherwise only sets him up for failure. His ball playing is a weakness. It's not catastrophically bad. No one's saying he can't complete a 5-yard pass. Before this level, it is bad. That's why quoting his passing accuracy, especially against teams like Estonia, is completely meaningless. Passing accuracy doesn't tell us anything about volume, type, value, pressure, or whether the completed pass forced a teammate into trouble. It doesn't even tell us if it was a hopeful punt that a striker happens to get a touch on before it fell straight to the opposition. Passing accuracy in isolation is not analysis. It is bollocks. The same goes for those compilations doing the rounds, supposedly showcasing his passing ability. I can do that right now. Look, here's Donnarumma picking out teammates, even under pressure at times. But none of this is helpful because it's a question of how repeatable are those actions. Can he be relied on to do it consistently, week in, week out, week in, week out? The answer is no. It's lovely that his goalkeeper coaches have publicly stated he's good with his feet, but if that's true, he's done a bloody good job of hiding it over the years. Indeed, Enrique literally dropped Donnarumma for the game against Bayern Munich last season and outright stated that he did so because he was concerned with their high press. He wants a keeper competent with his feet. If you watch Donnarumma, it becomes clear why his passing accuracy is so high. At PSG, his job was to play the simplest, safest passes imaginable. He wasn't asked to progress the ball, break lines, clip accurate diagonals, or dictate the rhythm of build-up. He's incapable of lowering the tempo. He doesn't function as a +1 in possession patterns, and he struggles to break through a press unless he just launches it long. And to be clear, these are nearly always long balls, not long passes. More often than not, possession is surrendered whenever opponents turn up the pressure. This matters because while Donnarumma's highlight reels are full of breathtaking saves, a significant chunk of those shots are self-inflicted. Some of those saves against Aston Villa and Arsenal spring to mind. They come directly from his own shaky distribution. It's football's equivalent of setting your own house on fire and then being praised for heroically putting out the flames. And too often, the fire doesn't even get put out. Think back to the Champions League quarter-final first leg against Barcelona in 23-24, or the Bayern tie the year prior. The first goal was on him, you'll see what I mean by that. But even on the second, which wasn't his mistake, just watch how desperate PSG's defenders are to not pass back to him once Bayern engage in their high press. That's a huge issue. Even when he isn't directly at fault, his limitations with the ball can create hesitation and panic in his own team. Now, could Donnarumma's ball playing improve under Pep? He's only 26, so in theory, yes, and I'd certainly hope it does. But look at the landscape we're operating in. He's been playing elite football for a decade, and there's been no sign of meaningful progress in this area. He's young, but he's not some raw, moldable product. He's an established international with nearly 500 senior games under his belt. He broke through at the age of 16 in an era where traditional goalkeepers were the norm, and is almost a reflection of the end of that generation of keeper. And let's not forget, he spent 2 seasons under Enrique, a coach whose build-up principles are very similar to Pep's. Do we really think Enrique wouldn't have tried to sharpen that side of his game if he thought it were possible? Instead, Enrique seemingly accepted the weakness for what it was, worked around it, and has now replaced Donnarumma with a superior on-the-ball keeper. None of that would suggest he's about to do a complete 180, which leads to one of the strangest aspects of this transfer: how extreme the shift is. If Ederson represents one end of the spectrum, the best version of Donnarumma is the polar opposite. And the thing is, it didn't have to be this black and white. It's not a zero-sum game. There were several goalkeepers available this summer who offered balance. Good or great with their feet, while also being great or brilliant in goal. It's not the case that because no one could match Ederson, you abandon the trait altogether. This doesn't automatically make Donnarumma a bad or irrational signing. Elite-level football has seemingly been moving away from prioritising ball playing to shot stopping. Moreover, football generally is always about trade-offs. Aït-Nouri isn't as defensively secure as Ake, but his attacking output makes the risk worthwhile. Haaland doesn't link play like Gabriel Jesus, but he scores at an absurd rate. That's a trade-off you take every single time. So the real question is this trade-off worth it? City are giving up a huge amount by putting their faith in Donnarumma, so the benefit had better be big enough to justify the sacrifice. And the retort to that has simply been a goalkeeper's main job is to save shots. As long as Donnarumma excels in the traditional side of goalkeeping, who cares if he isn't Ederson with the ball at his feet? Shot stopping outweighs everything else. And this, I think, is the biggest misconception about Donnarumma. I wish it weren't true, but he's not the flawless, shot-stopping phenom his reputation suggests. The reality is he's inconsistent, prone to lapses, and simply not at the level of Courtois or Alisson. I think I understand why people believe Donnarumma is this imperious shot-stopper. If I asked you right now, without overthinking it, what's the one game that sums him up? Chances are you've picked a late-stage Champions League performance from last season. Maybe those stunning saves against Aston Villa or Arsenal. Perhaps the penalty heroics against Liverpool. I'm not dismissing those moments, they were brilliant, truly, but using them as a yardstick for who Donnarumma really is as a keeper is misleading. The truth is, he's been far too inconsistent across his career to be considered the world's best shot stopper. Yes, all the great goalkeepers make mistakes, even Buffon and Cech had their moments, but not to this degree of frequency. Sure, you remember that incredible stop against Arsenal, but do you remember the howler against Liverpool that cost PSG the game in the 87th minute? What about the blunder against Atletico? Again, in the dying minutes. Do you remember this mistake against Norway, Auxerre, Nice, Lille, Monaco, or the double shocker against Arsenal? Another against Lille. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a pattern. But Nobbins, to be fair, all those mistakes are across his career, so of course it looks bad when you put them all back to back like that. No, every single example I just showed you came from last season alone, and there are even more I could have shown you. Zoom out to his whole career, and it paints an incredibly worrying picture. It's frightening how often these mistakes occur. That's why I think this is largely recency bias. Champions League heroics stick in the mind, so people forget, or ignore, the string of costly errors that have been a defining part of his game for too long now. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this shows up in his shot-stopping data, which is odd. Remember how I said that in the 23-24 season, he ranked among the very best keepers in Europe for post-shot expected goals minus goals allowed? Well, last season he ranked in the bottom 18%. Across his career, since that data's been tracked, he's basically split down the middle, as many seasons letting in more than he should have, as he's had overperforming, with some insane swings in there. This is the definition of inconsistency, and when you look closer, you see why. Earlier, I praised his ability to guard the higher parts of the goal thanks to his frame and reach, but the same cannot be said for shots low and inside the box. Here's a shot map of his goals conceded. Notice the clusters. Low. The eye test matches the data, whether it's reaction speed due to proximity, positioning, or simply lapses in concentration. The fact remains. Low shots in the box are a glaring weakness, one he's failed to iron out after a decade of elite football. And for me, the best shot stopper in the world simply doesn't have a weakness that exploitable. This is not the same as saying he's a bad shot stopper. That's clearly false and not what I've presented in this video. But when we start throwing around terms like elite, world class, best in class, the standards and expectations rise. And I wish we were done. I wish I could now move on to talking about how City can make Donnarumma work to the maximum. But I'd be lying by omission if I didn't address this. Donnarumma is 6'5". He's a big lad with a lot of weight and muscle to throw around. He has a basketballer's reach. And yet he's weak at commanding his area and claiming crosses. He's far too hesitant and doesn't come close to taking charge of his box. Which is bizarre because you look at him and think, this guy should be terrifying to play against in the air. But instead, he's overly passive or simply gets the timings wrong. Now I will say compared to the start of his career, this has improved. He's less of a liability now than the player who broke through at Milan, and I trust it's something he knows he needs to work on. But he's constantly caught in no man's land. He's far too weak in the challenge, and his decision-making is tepid at best. People keep telling me Donnarumma is the man for the big occasion. So why is he costing his team in the Champions League semi-final with attempted claims like this? The data backs it up too, and it's genuinely worrying. Around 40% of shots that follow a set piece end up as a goal against Donnarumma. That number alone isn't bad, but here's the problem. Based on the quality of those shots, he was only expected to concede 7 goals in that manner. In reality, he conceded 11. That is a glaring weakness and one that top teams will continue to target until he fixes it. Claiming crosses seems, to me, to be a very traditional goalkeeping trait. Ederson wasn't exceptional at it, but the principle was clear. You forfeit some traditional skills for the sake of modern ones. And that's a problem I have with Donnarumma. If the point of signing him is to prioritise traditional goalkeeping over modern traits, then all the traditional aspects should be elite. But they aren't. His cross-claiming and set-piece dominance have consistently fallen short. Again, I'm not saying he can't improve in these areas. Of course he can. But that's a hypothetical. It's very hard to predict the future, and it wouldn't be right to base my analysis off what might be. All we can do is look at precedent and his career so far. And his career is not March to May of 2025. It's a full body of work. If you want to focus in on those key Champions League moments, that's fine, of course. Those saves in 24-25 were remarkable. But let's be fair, go back through his other campaigns and a different era crops up in nearly every final knockout game. Real Madrid 21-22, 2-0 up on aggregate. He messes around on the ball, Real begin their comeback. Poor ball playing. Bayern Munich 22-23, pulls off an unreal save, but in the same match misjudges Koeman's shot. PSG lose the first leg at home and eventually get knocked out. Inconsistent shot stopping. Barcelona 23-24, gets away with it. But then against Dortmund, a tepid corner claim costs the first leg and tie. Doesn't command his box. Liverpool 24-25, has to do better with Elliot's winner, ultimately forgotten thanks to penalty heroics. When you look past the highlight reels, the weaknesses persist. And this is exactly what I meant earlier when I said it depends which Donnarumma you're talking about. Because there are two. On one hand, you have a keeper who is seemingly impossible to beat, a brick wall who will only be defeated by the finest of finishes, someone who keeps his side in the match in the most crucial moments. On the other hand, you have an inconsistent player who lets in shots that have no right to go in, fails to save his team, is often the reason his team loses, and struggles to command his area. So, those are Donnarumma's primary strengths and weaknesses. Let's park the critiques of his traditional goalkeeping attributes for now. For the purposes of this section, we can even assume he's unmatched in those areas. The undeniable fact remains. Donnarumma is not a particularly useful asset in build-up play. And yet, Pep has built his teams around goalkeepers who can orchestrate the play from the back, whether Valdez, Neuer or Ederson. He signed Donnarumma. He wanted him. He wanted him so bad we've more than likely made him the highest paid goalkeeper in the world. He clearly has a plan. So now we need to address how will he fit into City's system? How can he match the club's play style and philosophy? We also need to consider how other teams approach City. This is one of those things you don't notice until it's gone. Ederson's on-ball ability meant he could effectively act as an extra outfield player in build-up. A 3-2 shape became a 4-2, a 2-3 became a 3-3. Ederson was the extra man, which left the opponents with an impossible pressing task. You could commit more bodies forward, but in doing so, Ederson could just bypass the press with his passing range and find Haaland whenever he was left one-on-one at the back. With Donnarumma, the opposite will be true. He struggles in possession, and we've already seen it with Trafford, who's better on ball. City are struggling to build from the back. Opposition teams know this and are more willing to press high, disrupt City's build-up, and exploit the vulnerability. Not every team will press, but many will. Still, City clearly think it can work, otherwise they wouldn't have signed him. I've theorised two potential solutions to the pressing and build-up problem, the first of which would play far more to Donnarumma's strengths. One option would be for City to lean into a more direct, transitional style, with Donnarumma simply launching the ball into contested areas for City to fight over. Many fans have called for a more direct approach, and this would certainly fit. The issue is twofold. First, while it does relieve pressure and helps bypass the press, it turns matches into battles of aerials and second balls. That chaotic back and forth style is the exact opposite of Pep's footballing principles. The quicker the ball goes forward, the quicker it comes back. Second, City don't have the players for it. Their summer midfield signings were Cherki and Reinders, hardly duel-hungry second ball monsters. If this was the plan, they should have signed players like Baleba, Gibbs-White, Caicedo, Rice, Bellingham, Paquetá, or Bruno Guimaraes. And while City were linked with lots of those players in the past, the reality is that in the present, City are bottom of the second ball league table this season. Yes, Rodri has only started one game, but even so, this style would ask the squad to play against its nature, just to accommodate Donnarumma. The more realistic solution is to mitigate Donnarumma's deficiencies by committing extra bodies to the build-up, essentially what PSG did when circumventing this issue, especially against stronger sides like Liverpool or Arsenal, with Vitinha often dropping deep and even taking goal kicks. City have already trialled something similar, with Rodri or Bernardo slotting into the defence to help progression. The logic would be to double or even triple down on technical security, filling the pitch with press-resistant players like Rodri, Lewis, Foden, Bob and Cherki. You'd also want your best ball-playing centre-backs on the pitch with proper symmetry. Guardiola at left centre-back becomes essential, given Donnarumma's weaker left foot makes him even less reliable when opponents force play that way. But there are clear problems. The more players you drop back, the more pressure you invite, potentially pinning City into their own half. And when a midfielder drops that deep, you leave a hole higher up the pitch. So even if you beat the press, you may arrive in midfield outnumbered. PSG managed this approach partly because they didn't use a true striker. Their technical forwards happily dropped into those spaces. City have Haaland. While he's improved on the ball, asking him to replicate Dembele's role would be a huge stretch. Theoretically, there is a positive. If opponents commit too many men forward, Haaland or Marmoush could be left isolated 1v1, perfect for a long pass in behind. But those passes used to come from Ederson. Precise pings, not hopeful punts. Donnarumma can't replicate that. Now, if City had a quarterback mould of player and could utilise their vast passing range from deep, like how Trent was sometimes used at Liverpool, that strategy becomes a lot more viable. But I don't know who'd consistently be able to play those passes at City. Rodri's probably City's best distance passer now. I think even he would struggle. This has been a long analysis, but I think that speaks to how complicated this signing really is once you look beyond the surface. However you frame it, City now have to evolve. They can't build up the same way. Opponents will press higher, turnovers will happen more often, and that creates more counter-pressing chances for the opposition. So, is it worth it? Is Donnarumma good enough to justify all that? Some people compare this to the Haaland signing, but for me, I don't buy it. Guardiola has always loved proper strikers, and City desperately needed a clinical 9. When they signed Haaland, they were bringing in the best striker in the world with a record that guaranteed goals. It was hardly a gamble. With Donnarumma, it depends entirely on which version shows up. If it's the one who saved PSG and Italy in their biggest moments, then maybe you can argue the trade-off is worth it. But if it's the Donnarumma we've seen too often, the one who concedes soft goals, struggles to command his area, and gets bullied in the duels, then it's nowhere near worth it. Too much will have been sacrificed for too little gain. That's why this is the City signing from this summer I'm the least confident of. I could say with conviction that Aït-Nouri, Cherki, and Reinders will succeed and improve City. But here, I still have so many questions that won't go away until I see it for myself. And ultimately, I think this is a crossroads transfer. There won't be any middle ground. In a few years' time, we won't look back and say Donnarumma was fine. Either he'll be the keeper who saves City in our darkest moments, or the one who sets us back for years to come. Thank you all for watching. This video took an unreasonable amount of research and effort, so please don't mistake it for having an agenda. I'm desperate for Donnarumma to succeed, and I'm excited to see how Pep chooses to solve the challenges we've explored in this video. Your support means everything, and as always, a huge shout out to my hardcore channel member ultras, Tony, Spartacus, Silver Splits the Blue, Ethan Larios, and Austin King.